and this is Lit Happens, your celebration of the literary arts here in Saskatchewan. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Barry Heath. Now, Dr. Barry Heath is a veterinarian who has held many interesting positions. He spent 24 years as a coroner in Saskatchewan. Barry, welcome to Lit Happens.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Barry, let's just start. Can you tell me a little bit about your work, about what led you to want to write about your work?
Well, my children and my grandchildren don't know too much about farm life. And when I was growing up in Saskatoon, my parents used to send me up to the farm in Prince Albert in the summertime just to get me out of their hair. And I wanted to write about those experiences so they would know a little bit about the economics about farm life and the hardships and the pleasure I got from being there on the farm during those summers.
And so this must be your first book, or your Mosey and Me.
Mosey and Me is the first book, and as I said, I wrote it basically for family to know a little bit about my background and why I chose to be a veterinarian. And I just thought it would be an interesting pursuit, something to try to keep the brain stimulated, recall events from the past, and just put it down on paper so people could enjoy it.
Would you like to read a little bit from Mosey and Me?
Yes, I will. I'll read a couple of paragraphs from the introductory chapter. King is starting to lather up from our hard ride. We approach a steep hill, and he bounds forward, pitching me over his head as we descend to the river. I can't hold on to his mane, and am thrown off. As I somersault over his massive head, all my actions become a slow-motion sequence, and it seems to take forever before I strike the ground. Suddenly, a huge badger gives a loud hissing noise, presses itself as flat as possible at the entrance to its den, snarls and grabs my big toe, biting down hard, holding me tenaciously. The badger calls my name as he pulls me into the tunnel by my toe. How does he know my name? I thought. I try to pull away, but my toe is firmly in its grip. I slowly slip away from the terror of the mean badger and enter a state of semi-consciousness. My toe is moving side to side. I open my eyes. Barry, time to get up. My dad has his hand around my big toe, which is sticking out from under the bed covers. Time to get a move on and go to the farm. When I was a young boy, Dad had a way of gently waking me with his soft voice and a toe wiggle. That allowed me to make a slow transition to being fully awake and to remember what I was dreaming.
Thank you, Barry. Now, the other book has a quite a different beginning to it. Would you like to read a little bit from your other book as well?
Yes, okay. I was a coroner for 24 years, and what I have I'll just take the other book here because I underlined the passage. I moved back to Saskatoon in 1987, and I was already appointed a coroner at the time when I lived in Kindersley. And when I came to Saskatoon, the chief coroner at the time told me that there were 4 coroners in the city, and the police were used to calling them quite often, and only them. And she suggested, this is Dr. Stevenson, who was the chief, she suggested that I let the police know that I was a coroner and I was available for calls. So I moved here in June of 1987, and it took till the winter of 1989 before I got my first call. It was the dead of winter and very cold. My car sat on the driveway, not plugged in and covered in snow. The telephone rang after midnight. An officer wanted to know if I could attend a death along White Swan Drive, the furthest from my house as possible within Saskatoon. I said I could, but it might take a half an hour before I arrived. A long pause resulted, and I fully expected him to hang up and call another coroner. He didn't, and said he would see me soon. When I finished at the scene and released the body for autopsy, I went to my car and heard footsteps behind me. One of the officers thanked me for arriving so soon. He said that under similar circumstances, they often had to wait until morning for the coroner to arrive. Police had to remain at the scene and protect the body, and tying up valuable resources until the coroner got there. The icing on the cake when he said I could expect more calls if I responded so quickly. I went to 75 deaths that year. So that was my big start in Saskatoon.
But you started in Kindersley, and you talk a little bit about that in the book as well.
I was appointed in Kindersley as a result of being on an inquest jury. A fellow died in the oil patch, and the inquest was held about a month and a half after that. And I made 9 recommendations based on the circumstances of his death. And the coroner at the time was, he was the only man in the area. He was an elderly person and drove an older car and had his own health issues, and he didn't want to go out necessarily in the dead of winter. And he asked Justice in Saskatchewan if they would appoint somebody else in the area. So that's how I got appointed, actually, in May of 1983.
And it was quite a surprise to you to have
It was.
that.
Because the staff sergeant of the RCMP called me up and said, "I hear you've been gazetted." And I thought, what? Sounded like garroted almost. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're a coroner." And I said, "I don't know anything about what I'm supposed to do." And he says, "You'll get trained." And I actually hadn't even agreed that I would be a coroner when I was asked. I just said, well, it could be interesting work. And I just left it at that.
And it was interesting work for you.
Terribly interesting, yeah. I have a postgraduate degree in pathology, so this fit in really good with me anyway, attending deaths and reading medical reports and talking to physicians and that sort of thing.
And you talked about that first inquest and the recommendations made. And that's something that I found really interesting about the book, is that you tell us the stories, but you also tell us some of the recommendations and how they've actually, you can see that there have been changes that have been made based on those recommendations.
Yes, coroners can actually make changes based on not only an inquest, but just a normal routine, if you want to call it accident attendance routine. Circumstances that come up that can change, and there are examples of that in the book, of course. One of the major ones was one of the intersections just north of Saskatchewan on Highway 11, a road that comes down from Corman Park. There, I attended 3 deaths one night, and the Corman Park Road met the highway at a very acute angle, and it's very difficult for drivers to look back behind them to see oncoming traffic. And it might have been the last straw when I made my recommendations that that intersection should be blocked off and rerouted. And now it is, so that it comes out at a 90-degree angle to Highway 11 at Saskatchewan Road instead of where it was previously. So things like that can result from our attendance at scenes and recommendations we make either to highways or other departments.
And I guess that's part of the role of the coroner, is to understand why the death happens and try to improve situations so the same things don't happen again.
That's right. The whole idea is to find ways to prevent a similar death from happening.
And so when you collected all of these stories, how did you choose which stories you would put into the book?
Well, I still had floppy disks from the past, and I still had my diaries, most of my diaries from the 24 years. And just looking at the names in a diary and the dates would twig something in my mind that, oh, this could be interesting, or was one of my interesting cases. And I would go to the archives at the library to see if I could find anything in the newspaper about it, because I couldn't actually name names in the book unless it was considered a public record. Mm-hmm. So something that was in the newspaper could have been a court document on a murder case, for instance. And so I used the floppy disks, and I also wrote to the coroner's office and asked for information on some of the cases I did have from other pieces of information that I had kept.
Well, Barry, it's really a fascinating read, and but that's all the time we have for today. The 8 minutes goes by really, really quickly. So thank you so much for being here on Lit Happens.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
I'm Danica Lorer, and this has been Lit Happens, your celebration of the literary arts here in Saskatchewan. You can find more episodes by going to Shaw TV Saskatoon on YouTube and looking for Lit Happens. You can find me on Facebook, or you can reach me at danicalorer@gmail.com.